For 3 years now, I have been doing Ice Age Watch here on Outsiders. Clearly, no shortage of material. The premise of the segment is very simple. In much the same way that global warming aficionados seize on every hot day or drought or bushfire as evidence of catastrophic global warming in order to justify their unproven theory that man-made carbon dioxide emissions are heating up the planet, I am equally able, without fail, every single week, to point to any number of weather events around the globe that support an alternative theory, namely that our climate is cyclical, and that cycle is dictated, first and foremost, by the sun, shock horror, by solar activity, and that we are currently in a grand solar minimum of low to zero sunspot activity, which throughout history has always resulted in cooler times. Whenever I point to any cooler than normal events, however, the global warming crowd immediately shriek, "Oh, you can't use day-to-day weather as proof of the climate," even though that is precisely what they do whenever there is a heat wave, a cyclone, a drought, a bushfire, or a flood. Well, last week has seen the entire Northern Hemisphere recording one of the coldest Februaries in decades. The River Thames froze over. They needed a blowtorch on the Eiffel Tower. Camels are shivering in snowstorms. And the ancient temples of Greece are covered in snow. None of which comes as a surprise to anybody who has been watching sunspot activity dramatically decreasing over recent times. But the greatest damage done by these freezing conditions has been in places that like to promote their abundance of renewable energy. In Texas, which is a poster child for renewable energy, millions of people were left without power, and the Republican governor, Greg Abbott, blamed windmills that froze as a significant or major factor in the unprecedented power cuts. Tragically, a woman and her child died from carbon monoxide poisoning simply trying to stay warm. Hundreds of people have been hospitalized for similar poisonings, and a woman and her 3 grandchildren died in a house fire they lit to try and keep warm. According to Jason Isaac, a director of the Texas Public Policy Foundation who served 4 terms in the Texas House of Representatives, writing on the Federalist website, quote, "The blackouts, which have left as many as 4 million Texans trapped in the cold, show the numerous chilling consequences of putting too many eggs in the renewable basket." He writes, "There are misleading reports asserting the blackouts were caused by large numbers of natural gas and coal plants failing or freezing. Here's what really happened," he says. "The vast majority of our fossil fuel power plants continued running smoothly, just as they do in far colder climates across the world. Power plant infrastructure is designed for cold weather and rarely freezes, unlike," he writes, "wind turbines that must be specially outfitted to handle extreme cold," end of quote. In Germany, which recklessly and foolishly abandoned coal in favour of renewables, the windmills also froze and the solar panels were covered in thick snow last week and were useless. In Sweden, where they recently decommissioned a nuclear power plant for ideological reasons, the government was forced to run ads telling people not to use their vacuum cleaners in order to save energy. Yet the global warming model, the theory of the greenhouse effect, taught to our children by Al Gore and others over a decade ago, predicted the complete opposite. That theory predicted that by this winter, yes, this winter, there would be no more snow or ice in the Northern Hemisphere. Indeed, these are just some of those many, many predictions. Snowfall will become a very rare and exciting event. Children just aren't going to know what snow is. Dr. David Viner, a senior climate scientist at the Climatic Research Unit at the University of East Anglia, predicted. Winters with strong frosts and lots of snow, like we had 20 years ago, will no longer exist at our latitudes, Professor Mojib Latif of the University of Hamburg predicted 20 years ago. Goodbye winter, never again snow, the Spiegel newspaper said 20 years ago. Milder winter temperatures will decrease heavy snowstorms, the UN's IPCC themselves said in 2001. And of course, there was the famous end of snow headline, a prediction of the New York Times only 6 years ago. So, here's what the end of snow looks like in 2020. They couldn't have got it more wrong. Indeed, ironically, the Al Gore doomsday clock that was a feature of the late Rush Limbaugh's website and was based on Gore's dire predictions back in 2006, finally expired yesterday. Yes, yesterday we hit the predicted global warming Armageddon, and it was freezing cold across much of the planet. So, why, despite the evidence of their own eyes, and I guess more importantly their own frozen fingertips, do climate change zealots insist that we are headed towards a global warming doomsday? Joe Biden's climate czar, the half-wit John Kerry, who predicted there would never be independent peace treaties between Israel and its Arab neighbours, he got that one wrong, yesterday predicted we only have 9 years to save the planet from global warming. It's always a decade away, but anyway. Meanwhile, his boss has gone back to hiding in his basement because it's so darn cold. You can't make this stuff up. But look how the climate cult are now desperately trying to spin this story. And I quote from AP News. Experts say this polar vortex is stronger and longer than usual, and these events are happening twice as often as they used to. They say it could be a mix of natural weather variations and human-caused climate change, but they say they're not sure. The events show how vulnerable they go on, how vulnerable America is to extreme weather, both hot and cold, which increases with climate change, the scientists say. Oh, there's the sleight of hand. Did you spot it? Global warming is now hot and cold. Just like that. But more importantly for us here in Australia, when Texas has shown the danger and stupidity of relying increasingly on renewables, why are the Liberals in New South Wales and in Western Australia now hell-bent on closing down our precious coal-fired power plants? Just remember, currently, the EU is building 27 new coal-fired power plants. Turkey is building 93 new ones. South Africa is building 24 new ones. India will soon have over 1,000 coal-fired power stations. The Philippines is building 60 new coal-fired power plants. South Korea is adding 26 new ones. Japan is building 45 new ones. And China is also building over 1,000 new coal-fired power plants. So how does us shutting down our 6 remaining coal-fired power plants at huge cost to our energy bills and our future prosperity save the planet? The answer is, of course, that it doesn't. So what is really going on here? This madness is being forced upon us by 3 categories of individuals: by cowards, by crooks, and by clowns. The cowards are those within our businesses and politics who simply shrug their shoulders and say, well, I don't know what's going on, but everyone keeps banging on about climate change and it's real, so it's easier just to go along with it. Plus, I don't want to be singled out as some kind of weird climate denier. These cowards, many of them in powerful positions in politics, science, education, and increasingly the corporate world, are turning a blind eye as our prosperity and our security are being tossed onto the scrap heap, and they are too craven and cowardly to speak up about it. Then there are the crooks, the carpetbaggers and the con men. These individuals should, in my opinion, be in jail. They are either heavily invested themselves in renewable energy or are close to those who are. They preach climate change and global warming and sustainability, but in fact, are simply using their positions of influence to enrich themselves at the expense of the poorest and most vulnerable in our communities. And finally, there are the clowns. These are the people who willfully ignore the fact that every prediction made by the climate cults over the last 4 decades has been wrong. Every piece of modelling has been wrong. Every estimate has been wrong. Every claim has been wrong. Nobody, literally nobody, predicted that the greenhouse effect would result in 2020 being one of the harshest, coldest Northern Hemisphere winters in decades. Nobody ever predicted that global warming would result in the River Thames freezing back over as it has done just this last couple of weeks. Now, the clowns are rushing around saying, oh, no. Climate change actually means you can get extreme cold weather even though the planet is heating up. And now we learn that big tech are starting to censor what they call climate misinformation. So if you point out that the facts actually contradict the greenhouse theory, they will ban you. Actually, you can make this stuff up. George Orwell wrote 2 very good books about it. The tragedy of all of this is that the most powerful people and institutions, the government that we trust, are increasingly pandering to this garbage. As I said, they are either cowards, crooks, or clowns. Take your pick, and they're playing us for fools.